In the depths of the mines beneath the great city of Tharn, a young human named Kael Marnin toiled in silence. The sound of pickaxes striking the cold stone echoed through the cavernous tunnels, mingling with the steady drip of water from the walls. The air was thick with dust and the sharp tang of iron, but Kael hardly noticed anymore. His hands, calloused and raw, had long since lost their sensitivity. Day after day, he broke his back under the watchful eyes of elven overseers, who would only glance at him with disdain. The elves ruled Tharn, as they ruled all human territories, with cold precision. Their pale faces and slender forms were a stark contrast to the dark, damp world they had made their slaves live in. They saw humans as little more than tools to be used and discarded when no longer needed. In the eyes of the elves, humans were nothing more than creatures of short lives, quick tempers, and endless labor. But Kael was different. His eyes were sharper than the others, his mind quicker, always searching, always thinking. He had learned long ago that surviving in this place required more than just strength. It took cunning. A sharp mind could find ways to outwit the elves, and Kael was always looking for an opening. That day, while digging in the darkest part of the mine, Kael's pickaxe struck something unusual. It was not the smooth, hard stone that he was accustomed to. The blow sent a strange vibration up his arm, and as he dug deeper, his pickaxe met resistance, a soft, almost organic feeling. He pulled back the dirt and stone, revealing a smooth black shard. It was cold to the touch, and Kael couldn't help but run his fingers over it, feeling an odd hum beneath the surface. He knew the stories, legends of an ancient power hidden away by the first kings of men, sealed beneath the earth by the elves. His heart pounded in his chest as he held the shard in his hand. He wasn't sure why, but something about it felt alive. A faint glow began to shimmer from the shard, and Kael pulled it closer, his breath catching. He felt a jolt, as if something had awoken deep inside the shard. A vision flashed through his mind. Images of great battles, armies of men standing strong, and a city bathed in golden light. He saw an elven figure, cruel and cold, standing atop a mountain of skulls, laughing as the world around him burned. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Kael breathless, his fingers tingling. His mind raced. What was this? Was it real? Kael knew one thing for sure. The shard was no ordinary relic, and in this place of misery, where humans were nothing but slaves, it was a symbol of something far more dangerous, something the elves feared. Kael quickly shoved the shard into his pocket, glancing over his shoulder. The overseers were still at their posts, their eyes unblinking as they watched over the laboring humans. But Kael had a plan now, a plan to fight back, to show the elves that humans were far more than what they thought. In that moment, deep in the darkness of the mine, Kael realized that the world was about to change, and he would be the one to make sure of it. Kael had never been one to dream much. Dreams were a luxury for those who didn't have to worry about surviving another day in the mines. But the moment he held the shard, he felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't ignore. He had to find out more. It was as if the shard was calling to him, pulling him toward something far beyond the dreary life he had known. The next few days passed in a blur of work and whispers. Kael kept the shard hidden beneath his tunic, careful not to draw attention. The elves were ever watchful, their eyes sharp and cold, but they never suspected him. They never suspected the quiet human working in the back of the mine, buried in the shadows. They were too focused on their own superiority to notice the small shifts happening beneath their noses. But Kael could feel it. He could feel the power inside the shard growing, like a spark waiting to catch fire. The strange visions had not stopped. At night, when he lay in the cramped quarters with the other slaves, Kael would close his eyes and see flashes of an ancient world. He saw a city of shining spires, humans standing tall, and the elves, cruel and powerful, on their thrones, ruling with a grip that suffocated everything. The visions were always brief, but they were enough to make Kael question everything. The elves had told them that humans were weak, that their time was over, but the visions spoke of something different. They spoke of a time when humans were more than slaves, when they ruled alongside the elves. The shard was a key. He was sure of it. One night, After the overseers had locked the gates to the mine, and the slaves had settled into uneasy sleep, Cale slipped away. He moved quietly through the dark corridors of the mine, the distant sounds of the elves' voices fading as he made his way deeper into the tunnels. He had no idea where he was going, but he trusted the pull of the shard. It felt like it was guiding him. After what felt like hours, Cale came upon an old stone door, covered in dust and forgotten by time. The door was set into the rock, its surface etched with symbols he didn't recognize. He ran his fingers over the symbols, feeling a strange warmth beneath his touch. The shard, hidden inside his tunic, pulsed once again. With a deep breath, Cale pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of age and decay. In the center of the room stood an altar, covered in cobwebs and dust. Cale stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, and placed the shard on the altar. The moment he did, a low hum filled the air. The walls seemed to shift, and for the briefest of moments, Cale thought he saw shadows moving in the corners of the room. But when he blinked, they were gone. The shard began to glow brighter, the light growing until it filled the entire chamber. Cale stepped back, his mind racing. What had he done? Was this a trap? But before he could move, the ground beneath him trembled. A crack split the stone, and from the depths of the earth, something began to stir. The air crackled with energy. Something ancient had awoken. Cale's heart beat faster. This was no ordinary relic. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that would change everything. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind him. He turned quickly, eyes wide. The overseers. They had found him. Cale's heart raced as the footsteps grew louder, echoing off the stone walls of the chamber. He turned, eyes darting from side to side, looking for an escape. The overseers were coming, and they wouldn't hesitate to punish him for being in a forbidden place. They had no idea what he had just uncovered, but they would not take kindly to a human in this hidden room. He glanced back at the glowing shard on the altar. It pulsed with energy, brighter now than ever before, as if it recognized the danger, or perhaps it was the danger itself. Cale didn't know, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let them take him. Not now, not after everything he had seen. He grabbed the shard quickly, slipping it into his pocket and turning to run. His boots echoed on the stone floor, each step louder than the last. But the overseers were fast. He could hear them now, their voices cutting through the air, sharp and demanding. Cale's breath came in quick bursts as he sprinted down the narrow corridor, his mind racing for a plan. The tunnels were twisting, labyrinthine. He knew them well. The walls were covered in grime and centuries of neglect, but he didn't have time to think about that now. He turned a corner sharply and slowed, trying to listen. The overseers were still following, their footsteps heavy. They were close, but Cale had a plan. He had to trust it. He reached a narrow passageway that he had passed countless times before. It was almost hidden, tucked behind a pile of rocks and debris, a place most people would overlook. Cale pushed the rocks aside, revealing the entrance. He didn't hesitate. He crawled through the small gap and into the dark tunnel beyond. The air was cool and stale, but it was a hiding place. Cale flattened himself against the stone, holding his breath. The overseers passed by without noticing the entrance. He waited, still as the stone around him, until the sound of their footsteps faded. Only then did he allow himself to relax, though his mind was still racing. The chamber, the shard, the energy that had begun to stir inside him. He felt it all, alive, like a fire burning just beneath his skin. He couldn't explain it, but he knew this was just the beginning. He couldn't go back to the mines, not now, not when he had seen what was possible. The elves had kept them all in the dark, fed them lies about humanity's history. They had hidden the truth for so long. But Cale had seen it, the vision of a world where humans had been more than slaves, where they had ruled beside the elves. The shard had shown him that. Cale took a deep breath and turned back down the tunnel. He couldn't stay hidden forever. The elves would come looking for him. They would want to know what had happened in that chamber. But Cale wasn't afraid anymore. He had something they didn't. He had knowledge, and with that, he had power. The sound of the overseer's voices still echoed faintly in his ears as he walked deeper into the darkness. He knew one thing for sure: he would not stay a slave much longer. The world was about to change, and Cal Martin would make sure of it. Cale moved quickly through the dark tunnels, the weight of the shard in his pocket a constant reminder of the power he had just uncovered. His thoughts were spinning. The elves would not give up easily. They would search for him, and they would stop at nothing to find out what had happened in that hidden chamber. But he couldn't go back. Not now. He had to find a way to use what he had discovered. This shard, this strange artifact, was more than just a relic. It was a key. But a key to what? Cale wasn't sure yet, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that it was the beginning of something much bigger. He had seen it in the visions, the humans of old, standing tall, fighting side by side with the elves. They were strong, united. He had to bring that strength back. He had to show the elves that humans were more than they thought. Cale kept moving, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. The tunnels began to narrow, the air growing colder. He had passed through these passages many times before, but now they felt different. There was a strange energy in the air, something he couldn't quite understand. It was as if the very stones beneath his feet were alive, reacting to the shard in his pocket. As he rounded a corner, he spotted a flicker of light up ahead. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed on. The light grew brighter, and soon he found himself standing in a large chamber, the walls covered in carvings and strange symbols. The room was ancient, its age evident in the worn stone and the dust that coated everything. But in the center of the room was a pedestal, and on that pedestal sat something that made Cal's heart skip a beat. It was another shard, similar to the one he had found in the mines. But this one was larger, its surface gleaming with a faint blue glow. Cal felt a pull stronger than before. The shard in his pocket throbbed, as if answering the call of its twin. He stepped forward, drawn to it, and placed the shard he had found beside the glowing one. The two shards seemed to hum in response, their energy filling the room. Cal stepped back, eyes wide, unsure of what was happening. The air grew thick with power, the walls seeming to vibrate with the intensity of it. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, and Cal staggered, grabbing the pedestal for support. The low, rumbling sound filled the chamber, growing louder with each passing second. Cal could feel the power building, rising like a storm. He looked around, his heart pounding. Was this some sort of trap? Was he about to destroy everything? The rumbling stopped as suddenly as it had started. The room fell silent, the energy in the air fading. Cal stood still, trying to catch his breath. He glanced at the shards. The glow had faded, but there was something different now. The room felt changed, like something had awakened. Then, without warning, a voice filled the chamber, low, ancient, and full of power. "The time has come." Cal froze, his blood running cold. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. His heart raced as he realized he wasn't alone in this chamber. Something was watching him. The voice spoke again. "The world will be reborn. Will you be the one to lead it?" Cal's mind raced. The world, reborn. He didn't know what this meant, but he felt the weight of it pressing down on him. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The world was changing, and Cal was at the center of it. He took a deep breath and whispered to the empty room, "I will lead it." Cal stood frozen in the ancient chamber, his heart still racing from the voice that had spoken to him. The words echoed in his mind, "The time has come." He could feel the weight of them pressing down on him, but he didn't know what to do next. The room felt different now, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. The shards, lying side by side on the pedestal, seemed almost alive, their faint glow casting strange shadows on the walls. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick. Cal glanced around the room, looking for any sign of what he should do. There was no door, no obvious way out, just the pedestal and the glowing shards. He felt a pull toward them, as though they were waiting for something he had yet to understand. But he couldn't afford to waste time. He had to keep moving, had to figure out how to use this power before the elves found him. Taking a deep breath, Cal stepped forward. He reached for the larger shard, feeling the energy surge through him the moment his fingers brushed against its smooth surface. The hum of power intensified, and he felt his body tremble with the force of it. The shard seemed to resist for a moment, but then it gave, and Kale pulled it from its pedestal. As soon as the shard was in his hand, the room began to shake. The walls vibrated, and dust fell from the ceiling. Kale stumbled back, his heart pounding in his ears. Was this the beginning of the rebirth the voice had spoken of? Was this what it meant for the world to change? The voice spoke again, and this time, it was clearer, stronger. You must act swiftly. The elves will come for you soon. They cannot be allowed to know what you have found. Cal's mind raced. The elves had ruled for centuries, and they would not tolerate anyone challenging their power. But now, with these shards in his hands, Cal realized that he had something they could never control: the knowledge, the power, the hidden past of humanity. It was all within his grasp. He turned and looked at the shard he had placed on the pedestal, now glowing faintly on its own. Something about it seemed different now. It was as though the two shards were calling to each other, a connection forming between them. He stepped back toward the pedestal, holding the larger shard close. "Join the two," the voice urged, its tone urgent. "Bring them together. Only then will the power awaken fully." Kale hesitated for only a moment before he did as the voice instructed. He placed the larger shard gently beside the smaller one. The moment the shards touched, the chamber erupted in light. The force of the energy surged through Kale, making him stagger, his breath catching in his throat. It was as if the very earth beneath him was alive, reacting to the union of the two shards. The light grew blinding, filling the room with a brilliant glow. Kale shielded his eyes, feeling the heat of it, the power of it. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the light began to fade. The room grew still once more. Kale slowly lowered his hand, heart still racing. The air felt different now, heavy with purpose, with potential. For the first time, Kale understood what he had to do. The shards were not just relics. They were the key to something much larger than him, larger than any human or elf, and he would be the one to unlock their power. The world was about to change, and Kale would lead it. Kale stood in the quiet aftermath, the glow from the shards fading into a soft, steady light. His mind was racing. The air in the chamber was thick with power, the energy from the shards still pulsing through his veins. He could feel it. Something had changed. The world felt different now, as if the walls of the ancient chamber were no longer just stone, but something alive, responding to the power he had awakened. For a moment, he simply stood there, trying to grasp what had just happened. The voice had spoken to him, had guided him, but now it was silent. The room was still, except for the faint hum of the shards, which seemed to breathe in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Kale knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. He had uncovered a secret, something that had been hidden for centuries. The elves had kept humanity in the dark for far too long, but now, with the shards, Kale could feel the potential of what they could become. The humans were not weak, not inferior. They had once stood beside the elves, powerful in their own right, and with the shards, Kale could bring that power back. The voice spoke again, this time less forcefully, as though it were waiting for Kale to act. "You must leave. The elves will come soon. They will search for you, for what you have uncovered. You cannot stay here." Kale's heart skipped a beat. He knew the elves would come. They would stop at nothing to find him and destroy whatever had been awakened in this chamber. But Kale wasn't afraid anymore. He had the shards, he had knowledge, he had power. He looked around the room, quickly scanning for anything that could help him. The chamber was ancient, but there were no signs of danger, no traps, no immediate threat. Kale knew he had to move quickly. The longer he stayed, the more likely it was that the elves would find him. He turned toward the narrow tunnel he had come through, taking one last look at the chamber before he left. The shards were now quiet, but Kale knew they were not done with him. There was still so much to understand, so much more to uncover. As he made his way through the tunnels, his footsteps echoing in the silence, Kale's mind began to form a plan. He couldn't do this alone. The elves had far more resources than any human, but Kale had something they didn't: the knowledge of the past, the truth of what humans had once been, and the power of the shards. He would need to find others, people who had the courage to stand against the elves, to fight for their freedom. The shards were not just powerful tools, they were symbols, reminders of the strength humans had once had. And if Cal could find the right people, if he could unite them, they could rise up against the elves. But time was running out. The elves would be searching for him, and he couldn't afford to wait. Cal quickened his pace, determined to leave the tunnels behind and start his journey. The world was about to change, and Cal would be the one to lead it. Cal moved quickly through the tunnels, the weight of the shards still heavy in his pockets. The quiet, the darkness, it all felt too suffocating now. Every step felt like a countdown. The elves would be coming for him soon, and he couldn't afford to be caught. He had uncovered something ancient, something dangerous, and he knew the elves would do whatever it took to stop him. The narrow corridors twisted and turned, each one more familiar than the last. He had spent years working in the mines, but now they seemed different. The walls, the stone, everything felt charged, like it was alive. The power of the shards still hummed beneath his skin, and Cal could feel its pull. It was as though they were guiding him, leading him toward something. But what? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise. Footsteps, faint but clear. Cal froze. He pressed himself against the wall, his breath quiet and steady, trying to make himself as small as possible. The footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming. He had to hide. With quick, careful movements, Cal darted into a small alcove just off the main path, his back flat against the cool stone. His heart raced, every muscle tensed. The footsteps grew closer, the sound of boots on stone echoing in the silence. Cal barely dared to breathe, his mind focused on staying hidden. The footsteps paused, just a few feet away. Cal's pulse pounded in his ears. The silence stretched on, and for a moment he wondered if they had seen him. But then, to his relief, the footsteps began to move again, fading into the distance. Cal waited, counting the seconds in his mind, until he was sure they were gone. Finally, he let out a long breath and eased himself out of the alcove. He didn't have time to waste. Every second he spent hiding was a second the elves could use to track him down. He had to move, to find somewhere safe. He needed allies, people who would fight with him. Cal pushed forward, his steps more determined now. He had a plan, but it wasn't going to be easy. The shard's power wasn't fully understood, not by him or anyone else. But he knew one thing: the shards were the key to everything. If he could find others like him, others who believed in the old stories of human strength, he could unite them. They could rise up against the elves, show them that humanity wasn't finished. They could take back what was rightfully theirs. Cal's thoughts kept returning to the moment in the chamber when the voice had spoken to him. The time has come. The time for what? For a revolution, for the fall of the elves. He didn't know yet, but he was ready to find out. As he neared the end of the tunnel, Cal heard the distant sound of voices. His heart skipped a beat. Were they elves? Or something else? He crept closer, cautiously peeking around the corner. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. There, standing by a fire, were a group of humans, tough-looking men and women, dressed in weathered clothes, their eyes sharp and watchful. They were talking in low voices, unaware of Cal's presence. This was it. These were the people he had been looking for, the beginning of something much bigger. With newfound determination, Cal stepped forward, ready to make his presence known. The world was about to change, and Cal would lead it. Cal stepped forward, his heart pounding as he approached the group around the fire. The flickering light cast shadows across their faces, and he could see the hardened expressions of people who had lived through hardship. They looked tough, unyielding, as though they had faced the world's worst and come out the other side stronger. They were exactly the kind of people he needed. He hesitated for a moment, unsure how to make himself known. But before he could decide, one of them, a man with a thick beard and weathered armor, turned and spotted him. The man's eyes narrowed, and he raised a hand, signaling the others to stay alert. Cal froze, but the man didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he tilted his head and spoke in a low, cautious voice. "Who are you?" Cal stepped into the light, the shards safely hidden in his pockets. He had no time for formalities. He had to make them listen. "I'm Cal," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "And I need your help." The group looked at each other, uncertain, but the bearded man remained focused on Cal. He seemed to sense the seriousness in Cal's tone, and after a long moment, He motioned for him to come closer. "Help with what?" the man asked. "You're not from around here, are you?" Kale shook his head. "No, I'm from the mines, but I found something that could change everything." At the mention of the mines, the group's interest seemed to shift. The mines were where most humans were kept as laborers, working under the watchful eyes of the elves. A spark of recognition passed between them, and the man lowered his hand. "What is it you found?" he asked, his voice quieter now, as if he understood the weight of Cal's words. Kale glanced around to make sure no one else was near, then pulled the shard from his pocket and held it out, letting it catch the firelight. The group gasped. Even the man's hardened expression faltered for a moment as he stared at the glowing stone in Cal's hand. "This," Cal said, "is just the beginning. The elves have kept us in the dark for centuries. They told us we were weak, that we could never stand against them. But that's not true. We've forgotten who we were." The bearded man stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the shard. "You're saying this thing can help us fight the elves?" Kale nodded. "Not just fight them. We can take back what's ours. The shards are the key to something much bigger. I don't fully understand it yet, but I know it's the power we need to rise up." The group exchanged glances, the weight of Cal's words sinking in. It was clear they had been waiting for something like this, a sign that it was possible to stand against the elves. The bearded man stepped closer, his eyes now filled with determination. "If what you're saying is true, then we need to act fast. The elves won't sit idly by once they realize what you've found." Kale felt a rush of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. These people, these rebels, were just the start. Together, they could rally others, grow their strength, and fight back against the elves. It was no longer just a dream. It was real. "I'm ready," Kale said, his voice filled with resolve. "Are you?" The bearded man nodded slowly, his expression hardening with resolve. "We're with you." And just like that, Kale knew, this was the beginning of something that would change the world. The elves might have once ruled, but the humans were rising, and together they would fight to take back what was theirs.